Hey everybody, Pete A. Turner, executive producer and host of your Break It Down show. Hey, I wanted to take a few minutes to do a couple things real quick. One, thank you all so much for your support of Ride for the Brave. We're trying to raise $50,000 as we go across the nation to South Carolina and back. Yesterday we left Atlanta. Today we are in and leaving from Alabama, and we'll be in Shreveport soon. And we're looking forward to getting into Dallas, taking a break and raising some money there with some charity events. Really, really cool things happening with that. So thank you all. If you want to look more about our trip and try to support Save the Brave, you can go to savethebrave.org, click on the donate tab and put a small amount of money in there each month, or put a larger amount of money in there for a one-time donation. We're definitely going to put that money to work trying to save veterans' lives from PTSD and suicide. That's a big help. You can also follow the adventures on our Instagram, and it's at SaveTheBrave.org, or you can follow Scott or me. You know where to find us, Ekon Ramadi and Pete A. Turner. Facebook also has all the events typically. So if you're on the route, if you're going to be in, well, we're going to do events in Dallas. If you want to see where we're going to be at in Dallas, definitely check out the Facebook page. Okay, with all of that said, earlier this week, I dedicated the shows to my friend Dr. Andy Friedman, who died from disease last week, right before we left on this trip. I just found out. And then yesterday, I got the sad news that my good friend in Chicago, Nicholas Gorecki, someone I've known for, 20 years, and he passed on. So I want to dedicate today's episode to him because I dig who he was. He was a musical soul and just a wonderful guy, and always ready to have a lively political debate. So, Nick, this one goes out to you. Rest in peace, buddy. I will see you on the other side. Today's guest is Erik Kleinsmith. This is the podcast version of our live chat. You can always check out the live chats on YouTube. We always want you to go there. And also, hey, you listen on Apple Podcasts. It's another place you can go listen to the Break It Down show. Erik Kleinsmith is a master at intelligence analysis and operations. He was, in fact, my commander when we were in Bosnia in 1996, and we've done a number of shows together. He's also part of the team that unmasked who D.B. Cooper was, and so it's always good to have him on. Here's the topic we're going to talk about today. When we look at ANTIFA and decide whether or not to designate it as a terrorist group, we look at the reporting of Andy Ngo. Just follow what Andy Ngo is doing, and you'll understand quickly what ANTIFA is, and it's a problem. So as a terrorist group, how do you break them down? They'll say, hey, we're decentralized. You can't break us down. And then Erik and I know better because, look, intelligence analysis goes way back. It turns out most terrorist groups and insurgent groups don't want to be caught, and they like to hide their identity, and yet we still find out who they are, and they get targeted and arrested and dealt with. And that's why most of these things are historical rather than in present times. So it'll be really interesting to hear what Erik and I have to talk about with ANTIFA, and I think you're going to enjoy that. This is a Spy versus Spy episode, so enjoy that. And now here comes Erik Kleinsmith.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland. This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is Erik Kleinsmith, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
I've been running my yap for the last few minutes, just kind of talking about, our experience in Bosnia. And it's just remarkable to me, man, that we get to do this. I love the heck out of it. And you continue to, look, it's not a surprise. Your peers have said the same thing. You got a giant brain. But you continue to make me just go, God damn, you did that too? Like, you just have done so many incredible things. I'm so honored to know you, and I wish we had more time in the Army together to really have had a chance to do things, but we also were busy doing other things.
Absolutely.
It's such a treat, though. Here. I love it.
It's just, it's what's interesting is we had a family friend who's a Vietnam veteran. He's retired full bird colonel, Joint Chiefs of Staff, but have just been a friend of our family for years. And the guy was one of the first intel operators in Vietnam, right when intel was, just declared a branch. And we were sitting around just swapping stories the other night. He passed away a few years ago, but he finally just stopped and goes, man, you did a lot of stuff. And it's not that, it's finally at the point that it hit me, it's like, well, you don't think of it that way. Yeah. It's just you think of like what I kept thinking about. It's like, man, I really got to work with a lot of cool people.
Yeah.
I really got to work with some really great, operators and analysts and commanders and and things like that. And so that's what I see it more as, the success is the quality of your journey, not the end point. So.
Yeah, but your journey is exciting. I mean, among other things, you discovered Al Qaeda before 9/11. You
Right.
uncovered who DB Cooper was. I mean,
Right.
come on.
Right.
That's just like two things. Like every time
Well,
you talk, I'm like, you did that?
Yeah, and I don't want to spill the beans, but we're on another cold case that's just as poignant as DB Cooper, and we've got a fantastic lead. And just earlier this week, we found a really good piece of evidence for it. And it's just, again, it's part of it is is some of the different events linked to each other. And so the guy that I testified with for the Able Danger operation in 2005, he's a DC lawyer. He was representing the other members of our team who were still part of DOD, and therefore were not allowed to testify when him and I went up together. We had contact over the years, and he introduced me. And no, I'm sorry, I was introduced independently to Tom Colbert, the gentleman we had on earlier when we talked about DB Cooper, the lead of our DB Cooper investigative teams. It turns out he was relying upon the same lawyer for his DC work, and so we got to work with. And the lawyer's name is Mark Zaid. And as soon as I say that name, it's folks who follow the news and see the news find it's like, well, this guy is also the Ukrainian whistleblowers lawyer.
Huh.
It's like, yeah, absolutely right. And so, one of the things that I didn't see eye to eye with him on any of that, but it still doesn't mean he's not my friend. I mean, that's just the way it is. And so there's. You find linkages, and you find, I guess you want to call it the small worldisms. My wife's tired of me coming home. It's like, yeah, I just ran this guy that knows this guy that knows this guy. She's like, you say that all the time. It's not it's the same thing over and over.
Yeah.
I mean, you didn't know it, but after we returned from Bosnia and went back to Germany, this was November '96. That fall. My brother was deployed to Bosnia with the Marine Corps, and he was doing they called it the PIFWIC mission, where the person's indicted for war crimes, and more formally known as the snatch and grab mission of finding some of these guys and taking them, bringing them to justice. And in fact, we sent a couple of our agents. I had to detail a couple of them to that operation while we were still in Germany. Bob Thomas was on that one. He was out of your field office. My brother goes down to Tuzla, and he goes, yeah, I'm sitting in a meeting and somebody's just looking at me strange from across the table, and he's just looking at me and finally at the end of the meeting he goes, when did you join the Marine Corps? He's like, years ago. He's like, yeah, I just saw you in an Army uniform last year. He's like, no, it's my brother. It's just that, then I get a call. It's like, hey, do you know this guy? Yeah. I go, well, what do you think? And so we vetted different people for each other over the years.
That's funny. I had a similar experience. I was just outside I was in Baghdad, but just outside of the Green Zone, just to the east, just south of Sadr City. And I'd done a lot of work there with the 82nd, and there's an up and coming major who kept getting jobs above his rank, and he was really just killing it. And then those guys rotated back, and then he came back, and he was on the commanding general's staff. And so he sees me as they come through a briefing. He's like, "What, are you still here?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, yeah. "You have to tell me what's going on," And like, but
right.
It's so crazy how those things work out. I wanted to look into the intel analysis part of your brain and look at some of these problems with current events and how we define more. We just had a great conversation. I just really love that one with Joshua Dudley.
Yeah, I did too.
Yeah, how he approaches things, because I hate when people dismiss someone who's clearly an expert, and all you got to do is listen to that guy talk. You don't got to agree with him, but he's an expert.
Right. Right.
This Antifa thing, if they are designated, and I've heard people who aren't intel people talk about this, but if they are designated as a terrorist group, what does that mean? And then how do we crack the nut? Because they say they're uncrackable.
Well, I guess, first thing I did when, Antifa has been around for a few years, and the first distinction that I drew, and I've got and I put this in a chapter of my book on threat profiling, and it's not criminal profiling like serial profiling a killer, or it's not, and it's much different, and it's obviously not racial profiling because that's just ridiculous from a moral standpoint and analytical standpoint. So threat profiling is just a way to analyze an entire group, and you break it down into 8 categories. And one of those categories is just the motivations, the goals, and objectives of the group. Now, motivations is an individual quality, whereas goals and objectives are they can be stated or non-stated, but your objectives are the small goals that you have to achieve in order to fill your overall the overall goal of a group. And the overall goal of the group is the whole reason why it exists. When you look at the first thing I saw was detractors saying, well, you can't designate these guys as a group because they're not a group, it's a movement. And if movements, and that is absolutely false. And we've tracked, there's other groups. When Al-Qaeda was crushed with the initial invasion of Afghanistan and operations in the Middle East and Yemen and Iraq, they turned into a very desegregated, very independent, you want to call it a movement organization, where each cell operated independently, and they really only needed to, before they, before 9/11, they were selecting targets. Osama bin Laden himself was doing target selection, his being the key decision maker. After they had to change and evolve into a dispersed and desegregated organization, it was left up to individual cells to pick out individual targets, and the higher authority was gone. But the general, this is the direction we want to go, was still present. And in the military, we call that the commander's intent. So if when you get an order for an operation, if you forget everything of the operation, as long as you remember the intent, we're supposed to take this terrain, we're supposed to do here, even if you're separated and you're running into problems, or you're running into adversity, or whatever your challenge is, as long as you remember the intent, you're still doing the same thing everybody else. You're driving toward the same objective. With the Antifa, it's the same thing. They started as a desegregated, dispersed, decentralized organization. You have individual cells, but those individual cells are highly coordinated. There's a reason why they're finding pallets of bricks left out in the cities, and fireworks and weapons and cash. I mean, I just saw another story of an entire bus that the police had finally looked through, and it was just filled with machetes and bludgeoning weapons and things like that, just to pre-position for these crowds. And so it's not beyond. Now, again, Antifa is not the only group out there. But I mean, there's even right-wing extremist groups. There's been reports of white supremacists or the Boogaloo Boys, or whatever you want to call them. But by and large, Antifa is the most sophisticated, most present, and really has the largest backing. You're looking at, I'd say, if you just had to put a number on, I'd say Antifa is about 90% of what you're seeing. But you can't say that they're exclusive. A key way to understand their goals and objectives is read their own material. Go to their own websites. They broadcast it. They even have their own 10 steps. 10 directives on how you're supposed to behave. As long as you have that, and as long as you have a motivation, and as long as you have black clothes, you're in. There's no entry point. There's no screening method. So the problem is you're getting folks that are going off the reservation. You're independent operations. You're going to see different problems, but tie these guys into. To tie them, into an organization, you can still understand their targets. You can still understand their demographics, their organization, the leadership structure, all of these components of the threat profile. And as long as you can do that, then you can predict, then you can counter, and then you can then you can take active measures to defeat them. Now, this is purely from a tactical standpoint. You're not looking at it. I didn't bring anything in terms of legality or poste comitatus or, anything like that. There's a lot of folks getting wrapped around the legal hurdles of the definition of terrorism and things like that. I used to teach a counterterrorism analysis class, and the first thing we talked about was write your own definition for terrorism. Now let's compare it, because there's 54 of them out there in official channels. Wow. And even the FBI and the DOD definition were different.
Yeah.
Significantly different. whereas FBI is a legal term and the DoD was a tactical term. And so, once you combine the two, then we kind of get a general idea. And that's folks that are splitting hairs over the definition of terrorism. It's not agreed upon. Every country, even again, it has their own definition. So it's a little bit different there.
And I think we should all agree that it's a problem. I mean, a group.
Absolutely.
I mean, just because you call yourself anti-fascist doesn't mean that you're not a fascist. I mean, that's like the drunk guy say he's not drunk. I'm not drunk. It's the drunkest guy in the bar,
Yeah. Right. Well, that's, and that's the kind of what we were talking about with Joshua earlier. And that this is the article I put together for later. This should come out later this week. But one of the things that you're looking at is, yes, you have this is a toxic mix right now of 3 different factions. And to understand what's going on, the problem with watching the media or watching the news, your normal news sources, is you're getting anecdotal on the scene reports of rioting. And you're getting bits and pieces, and then you're getting analysis based upon bits and pieces from the media, and it's not accurate. It's just not there. So you have to kind of step back and take a holistic approach and say, what are we looking at? What's the main side of the problem that we're dealing with here? And so the first set is the totally legitimate part is the protesters and demonstrators. By and large, 90% of them are peaceful. They're angry. They're upset. And for whatever. Not even going into the injustices that is felt, whether they think it's systemic racism or whether it's a myth or whether that's, there's something wrong with every cop, that's a whole nother issue. But it's just the fact that they're out there. Now, those demonstrators are going to put stress on any police force, and most of them are out there for their own protection, just to make sure they're on the right way, they're on the right path. And that's when, you're seeing live video of police talking to protesters, sympathizing with them, taking a knee with them to show them that, look, we're in solidarity with you. So so you have the law enforcement of a given city that's under that kind of stress. More so if the police are the target of their anger, that makes the stress there even further. Now add in a criminal element and the looters and folks that are taking advantage of that. As soon as a criminal element, whether it's just a band of kids or whatever, 8 people in a van driving around New York or whatever the tactic is, that looting is not going to happen until they get the perception that the protests and their presence and something else has overwhelmed the ability for law enforcement to do their job, to maintain law and order. And great example of that is a hurricane. After a hurricane, where you see massive looting, or a blackout, where you see massive looting. Well, the hurricane has overwhelmed the police's ability to normally do their job and be where they need to be. That's the second element, is that criminal element. And you're going to have that's always present. You're always going to have that. That's not an organized event. It's an opportunist, obviously fairly selfish act of what they're doing, destroying businesses in the process and that kind of thing. But now add in the third element, and that's these political radicals like Antifa. They are there specifically. I mean, they've been there. I know folks are tracing it back to 2007. You really want to trace them back to something, trace it back to the 60s and 70s, and when we had the Weather Underground and we had the Red Brigade and Action Direct and the Modern Meinhof Gang, which is also the Red Brigade. You had these fairly isolated enclaves of extreme Marxist leftist groups that operated in Europe. And for the Red Army faction, for example, they were the children of Nazis. So they were second generation. So they were had revolted, and they were therefore anti-fascists, because they were taking actions to, from that standpoint. But they were not anarchists. They were specifically to overthrow if anarchy is a cause is a means to the end. So when you see folks out there rioting, they say, well, we're putting the anarchist symbol out there for the teens that are looting and causing destruction today. That anarchy symbol is more a symbol of chaos that is required in order to overthrow. It's not necessarily like this is the end, the end state where we just want to have our total anarchy. No, we want to impose our own views. We need anarchy to do that. So that's, when you look at these groups, that's really this is now a toxic mix of these three groups. And so you have your political radicals that are taking advantage of both the peaceful protesters and taking advantage of the looters and the criminal elements that are flowing through at the same time. If you just had criminal elements and the protesters, you're just going to have looting. When you add in the political radicals, now you have destruction of property, destruction of police stations, and now you also have attacks on both the police and attacks on private citizens trying to defend themselves. And that's what that political, as soon as you see that in there, that's what you should be expecting from an analytical standpoint. So as soon as you see a political radical group show up, expect these attacks to be well organized and directed toward a specific target set, and that's authority and from a person, personally or from a facility standpoint.
It strikes me a little bit odd that the protest object is police action. And to peacefully protest, you need police there to protect you from.
Right.
So it's very weird, man.
But that's the best part of that story, because that's the most heartening things that you can read and see this week are citizens that are angry and protesting are allying themselves with the police because they understand that not every police officer is racist. It's 99.95% of them are not. They're just trying to do their job. Many of them are minority. Many of them are, female or whatever. And you're seeing instances where, just like the part in DC where the protesters found the ANTIFA member who was using a hammer to smash up the sidewalk. They jumped him, removed his weapon, and they threw him at the police. Take this guy out. He's not one of us. And that's absolutely right. He was using the protest for as a camouflage to do nefarious deeds or to try to provoke them by smashing a window and then backing off and letting them do wherever. So it's interesting from a policing, they call it intelligence-led policing standpoint. You're seeing these different groups. You can actually see them physically once you've studied them and analyzed them. So if you see a group that's peaceful protesters, not all of them are wearing masks. They're wearing, just T-shirts, something for the weather. They're a different demographics. You're getting a more of a widespread, a lot more higher percentage of females in that population. But then if your crowd then changes to all black clothing, predominantly middle class, predominantly white, predominantly male, with backpacks, which means they're carrying other things in the backpacks, that protest just got hijacked by a radical element. And so that's kind of the things that intelligence-led, policing, the analysts should be looking for when they're looking at and surveilling groups overall. And again, you'll see it's a difference between night and day, literally, because the protest that happens during the day, those folks go home, but the radical elements stay, and the demographics of them changes, as soon as night falls.
The other thing too is like these old cars being brought into town, and even if they're old cop cars, these piles of bricks. Yeah. At some point, someone purchased these things, and
Yep.
There is a and you can be creative in hiding it, but you need one mistake to crack that.
Well, that again, and then it refutes the argument again that you cannot profile these guys. No, absolutely you can. There is a part of the organization and another part of the threat profile that I talk about in my book is the sustainment operation.
Right.
From logistics and finances and freedom of maneuver and all the things that they need, and and that's what kind of disgusts me is to see high profile celebrities donating to legal funds for protesters, for their bailout and everything else, without knowing where exactly is your money going. Is it going to a peaceful protester who is, broke curfew, or you did something, something like that as a form of civil disobedience for demonstration? Or did you just bail out somebody who tried to burn down Nashville City Hall? You have no idea where your money is going. And to me, it's the most, the support base for a terror group can be witting or unwitting. They can be willing or unwilling, and it can be legal or it can be illegal. So this is an example of a legal, unwitting, celebrity who's donating money to a cause, and they're not, once you've given that money up, it's up to the organization, whoever you gave it to do what they want. If you don't have any idea what that organization is, you just made a huge error, unforced error at that, in what you're donating your money to.
The other thing about the analysis, I would imagine, is that you can take and make a profile, again, not racially profile, but you can make a profile of someone who's apt to commit a federal crime by going to commit some kind of, looting act or destructive act in another state. You're going to cross a state line. You have to pay that person or some way find someone so fired up that, they can do it. You still got to feed them. You still got to give them bricks, and all of these things require, as you said, sustainment operations.
Right. And that's again, the reason why these leftist groups in the 70s died is because they were not able to jump generations.
Right.
And that's one of the contributing factors, beside the fact that most of them were imprisoned and incarcerated eventually. But when with this group, before we even had Antifa, we had Occupy Wall Street. Before we had Occupy Wall Street, we had the Earth Liberation Front, or Animal Liberation Front. These guys were breaking into defense locations, putting sheep's blood on missile coasts, just doing disruptive acts like that. It wasn't anything close to what you're seeing now. But thanks to social media and the vast jump in their ability to communicate with each other, this is, again, their capabilities have risen exponentially. Again, you're seeing the similar demographics that are in this group. Like I just described, that there's a certain age that is going to be out there, trying to bang with the police and trying to do whatever they can to loot and destroy. You're not seeing 40 to 50-year-olds do that.
Right.
You'll see them out there for the protests, but then when you see the older folks, and the only folks that are left are those who are still got vim and vigor and want to run a gun, you're going to see that change. Again, all of that can be analyzed, and therefore all of it can be predicted, and therefore all of it can be countered.
Yeah, and you're right. When you are a runner and a gunner, and you're always getting in gunfights with professional law enforcement folks, you are going to get arrested. It is going to stick at some point, and you're going to get fingerprinted every time, and it's not going to work long term. It just doesn't.
Right. Now here's one of the problems that they're going to run into, and this is down the line, weeks and years from now, is they're going to have to take a look at who is filling the ranks. Where are they getting their people from? How are these folks getting assimilated? Or, we talked about this all the time with Al Qaeda or any kind of Islamic fundamentalist movement. It's like, when did these guys become hardened? And for the 9/11 hijackers, at least the core pilots that lived in Germany at the time, they became hardened while they were, not while they're in the Middle East, but once they had moved to the West and were appalled by the Western, they called it Western decadence, or, the open society. And it was so uncomfortable to them, they became hardened while they were at, college and universities, and like Muhammad Atta in particular in Hamburg University. You're going to see the same thing as law enforcement and investigators and even intel analysts that support them start looking at the sources of recruitment for Antifa. And I tell you, it's the biggest problem they're going to run into is every major road is going to lead back to a college atmosphere where they've left the house. They no longer have mom and dad's influence on a day-to-day basis, if they ever had it.
Right.
And now they're in an environment with a malleable mind that's able to be changed and manipulated and things like that. That's going to be tough for law enforcement to say, we're going to need to go into college campuses and understand this. And that's going to cause a huge uproar and echoes of Vietnam and all the, the same things that we saw in the 60s and 70s. So like, we can't have them doing this. And it's like, well, these guys are coming from here. This is the fertile ground where recruitment is taking place. It's not a surprise. So
one of the questions people have been asking on social media is, if we're going to name Antifa a terrorist group, why are we not doing that with the Bugaloo Boys? Why not with the KKK? Can you talk a little bit about how those decisions are made and why the one and not the other? Hey, this is P.A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here, and if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it. Can you talk a little bit about how those decisions are made and why one and not the other?
Well, I mean, part of it is, you know, is you don't want to call it it's not political expedience. It's really more of capability.
Okay.
And is if the organization is, you know, KKK is nowhere close to where they were in the heyday. They, you know, so they've really been relegated as a criminal element. And Bugler Boys is really not much more than a gag. I mean, yes, there's activities that they're working on, but it's not, you're not seeing them, you know, where Antifa stepped over it is when they stepped over the line with, you know, and I don't want to go so far as saying open insurrection, but with this event, this steps over the line to the point where they're not just an organization that is there for movement. They are there for, you know, they've been conducting an open violence in 30 cities. You know, you see the criteria changes, like as they've risen to that level of being designated a terrorist organization. Again, you can profile the Bugler Boys, you can profile the KKK. A lot of folks don't know this, but the KKK stands for the Greek word for circle, and which is kuklos. And so after the American Civil War in Tennessee, there were several Civil War Confederate veterans that it started as almost a benign veteran organization with just a handful of folks. Once they discovered that they could discovered that they could do a lot of their acts riding through the city with hoods on and causing hell and mayhem, you know, they started drawing in more, almost immediately started drawing in radical elements. And so you can't say, well, no, KKK started as an innocent organization. Yeah, for maybe a handful of folks, but as soon as it got with more radical elements into it, it's been like that ever since. In fact, there's a Confederate cavalry commander, Nathan Bedford Forrest, who's always been associated as one of the founding members of the KKK. He dropped out after he saw how radical it had been and how radical it had gotten right from the start. Mm-hmm. And it was almost from that point on, they've had a sorry history throughout, as a blight on our American history through the rest of the time. Antifa may have started as just a bunch of folks who were disaffected talking with each other, and it's you have to look at their history in terms of how did they get into the point where they became so hardened. This past couple of days became one of their catalysts that says we now have the ability, because of these nationwide protests and the looting that's going on, we now have the ability, and we have the right environment because we've overwhelmed the police. We can now target them, and we can now do the things and move forward with what we want to do. That's where it becomes, you know, you've just stepped over the line there.
Yeah, and there's a couple of problems with that belief. Is one, you can't maintain your op tempo, just like the police can't flex to cover that, and then you know, these guys are getting arrested. They're from out of town. They get, all these things. The police don't quit. They just keep going. You may be moving faster, but they're good. They're going to ensnare you. And the other thing too, when we look at organizations, the KKK, great, terrible, but they're sort of accounted for in terms of resources. You know, they're a known thing. They've been around for a long time. We probably know the name of every KKK member in the nation. Right. You know, Boogaloo Boys, probably not as much yet, but the Crips, you know, the Norteños, all these different groups, they're accounted for within task force. There is these things. Yeah. So you don't need to designate them as a terrorist group, but you do need to find a home for Antifa because they are taking hammers to people's heads in public. Right. You know, and we can't have that, and the cops can't handle all that. You know, you think about any kind of police force, Portland, where they're known to act. There's just only so much capacity on that force to be able to deal with something that is this big. It's bigger than what one police force can do effectively. You know,
right, and that's my recommendation. Anybody that's going to have to do analysis on these folks or do any kind of countermeasures is you know, because they are a decentralized organization. Look at after you've looked at their motivations, their goals and objectives, then you have to take them on a city by city, a cell by cell response. You have to. It's like the group that's any group that's operating out of Boston is going to be different than what's operating out of Phoenix.
Right.
There's going to so from that point on, once you've got the overarching understanding of the organization, the only way to tackle it is to go at the tactical level, just for your jurisdiction or just within your area, because it's going to be, there's going to be some commonalities, like I said, with like the demographics, everything else, but you have to break down your specific organization, the specific leadership of that small cell, and then look at what within your area, what's the specific targets that they're going to go after in my area.
Right.
Given what everything else going on.
One of the few things I pulled out of the counterintelligence basic course was the structure of the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, and then their different factions, and they're decentralized, and just time and age, it gets all these things, they get absorbed.
IRA is a good case study of showing how an organization which may have started with a unified purpose has fractured. And so it's like you had a break off of the IRA had a splinter group called the Provisional IRA, but the PIRA. And then there was another one called the Real IRA, because the regular IRA wasn't the real ones. Right. Every time you get a splinter group, that's a very serious incident when you're looking, especially in terror, because groups do not splinter off to become more moderate. They splinter off to become more hardened. So the first thing you should look at when groups splinter like that is, one, what has been the change in what's going to be the change in their tactics and their targets and the level of violence that they're willing to perform. The second thing is groups don't splinter off in mass. One person does that, one leader does that. So there's a focal point for that splinter, and it's one person who has the leadership characteristics to pull them away from the larger group and say, this is the way we should go. And again, he's not going to be the guy that says, well, we're going to splinter off because we're going to cooperate with police a little bit more. Never happens. We're going to cooperate because we're going to do more violence because we're not happy with how slow the main group has been progressing. With Antifa, each individual group is going to have a certain level of violence that they're going to want to lay out. Again, if it wasn't for the COVID virus and keeping everybody cooped up for a couple of months, this again was another feeding contributory factor these guys had nothing to do for months. All of a sudden this event shows up, we got something to do. And let's mobilize everybody who's been sitting on their hands for so many weeks. Let's get them out on the street, for anything. This is a perfect opportunity for us to further our cause. And what's kind of upsetting to me is to find so many municipalities who were caught asleep and didn't see this coming when, soon as you saw the demonstration start, they should have recognized this is coming with that. But the good thing is now in hindsight, the next time something happens where there's mass demonstrations, and there's going to be some other time,
sure.
Hopefully they'll be more prepared for it.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about was COVID, and it's such a big thing because it's global. What aspect of it do you want to talk about? What's fascinating to you in terms of, from the point of view of how you look at problems?
My big thing when I looked at the whole COVID pandemic was how poorly and again, from an intel analytical standpoint, and I did an entire webinar for another group, AFCEA, it was an hour long, that walked through, was just how bad the models were. And again, it's part of it's not really their fault because we've not really had precedents to draw from. Folks that do earthquake predictions and hurricanes and things like that had more empirical data to rely off of than we had for COVID models. And so, like, one of the most significant models at the very beginning was the IHME, the Institute of Health and Metrics and Evaluation. I can't remember the exact, but out of the University of Washington. They were using, because there was no data to extrapolate from, the only data that they were using was how the virus was spreading and propagating in China, and then in the first European cities in northern Italy and a couple other places. It was not translatable to how our society runs, how we run our society in the U.S. And so they were predicting these massive, number of casualties, and we planned off of that. We shut things down because of that, and the same thing with Niall Ferguson out of the UK.
Right.
It's just like initially they were calling for 2.2 million deaths for this thing. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, we were wrong. Look, and just, decision makers from the president on down to, your local school boards, like, look, we made a ton of decisions that affected people's lives financially off of your bad models. And so that was one of my biggest concerns. And I wrote 2 articles about it to take a look at. Look, you need to really critically look at some of these models. And just because somebody says they're a doctor or scientist does not mean they understand the data that they're looking at in context with everything else. That's part of that frustrating me as an Intel guy. It's like, we were picked apart all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and deserved, and we needed to be, and we deserve, we picked each other apart. But folks were taking some of these scientific models and some of these scientists, they throw them up in the air. It's like, well, this is gospel. No. It's, you have to take, critically look at what's the purpose of this model. What's the data that's going in it? If it's relying upon data reporting from China, it's crap, because we know they lied. We know they continue to lie, and they're going to lie about lying. And yet you're building a model off of that and saying that this is how it's going to work within the U.S. That was one of the biggest problems I had.
Speaking of China lying, we just had Joshua Phillip on the show talking about this, but the thoughts on Mike Pompeo's statements about what the Intel community was indicating in terms of the origin and how China handled this thing. What are your thoughts? I'm not asking you to necessarily make an opinion about it, but what are your thoughts on the validity of what he's saying and seeing? Because I don't trust China. I don't trust communist governments in general. So what do you think?
Right. And that's what we were talking about earlier, is like we started in 1999, 2000. Again, another thing that I was involved with, but we were doing technology protection to show Department of Defense, because we were the first DoD data mining operation that was successful in its history. And this was while I was at the Land Information Warfare Activity, working in the basement of INSCOM headquarters. We were able to show how our technology was being stolen, through both colleges and universities that were doing the research, and then through partnerships with multinational corporations. I mean, one of the places we looked at, and this was for a particular technology, is we looked at the metallurgy department of graduate students at Stanford University. At the time. I think they had a list. They had it up on their website. These are our graduate teachers assistants, folks that are part of this lab. 19 of them were Chinese nationals. One of them was a Russian, and he committed suicide partway through the academic year. That was the lab that was doing the experiments on these diamond, the technology we had picked, which was called diamond-like coating. And so it's like we're protecting all this information and classifying it. These guys are stealing it before it's classified. That's where the problem is. And so,
say that. I get exactly what you're saying, but explain why that's important, just at like a layman's level.
It's, when you're protecting classified information, it goes into there's physical protection of it. It goes into a physical secure lab or a compartmented information facility. It's locked down physically. The personnel are under scrutiny that have to work with it. But when you have it out there in the open and you're just doing the basic scientific research on it, there's hardly any protections are on that, because it's, as an academic, as in Western academics, the sharing of information is more important than anything. It's just our culture. So it's a great vulnerability in terms of how we do this kind of research. And so it's like, look, I don't have to break into this facility. I don't have to hack into the network. I don't have to recruit agents to go steal it. All I have to do is put a couple of students in there that while they're doing the research for it, and all they got to do is bring their research back. I got it. And so that was one of the frustrating points, is we saw a list of, and the U.S. has a technology protection list. These are the technologies that we deem important that must be protected. And then we were looking at what was being stolen. And if you put a Venn diagram and you put those two together, only that overlapping part were we protecting what they were trying to get at. What they were taking, most of the stuff that they were taking, we weren't even considered, we didn't consider it vitally important. So then we weren't putting the same protections over it.
And that's just the Venn diagram. You scope back and all of a sudden you realize it's an Euler diagram and they're stealing even more stuff.
Right.
It's terrible.
Exactly.
The other thing is as an Intel person, the tasking that comes out, to these college kids, they're not agents, but yet they're agents.
Right. Well, again, it's witting and unwitting, willing and unwilling. And, it's like you're going to do studies on this. You're going to come back and, as soon as you get back, you're going to get debriefed whether you want to or not. So where'd you work? Who'd you talk to? What'd you work on? Do you have your files? That kind of thing. And it's one person, but it all adds up. It all helps to paint the picture to be able to do that. Same thing with when I talk about the corporations. It's like we may be working on a technology with a French company, and the French company also has relationships with a Chinese company. And as we're trading information back and forth, they're also trading back information. So there becomes an overlap with some of that data as well. And that's just another easier method to take that information.
Yeah. It's frustrating. And then when we politicize this stuff and say, don't be xenophobic or whatever it is about, China. Okay, but they're working on their project at Stanford. We're not xenophobic. Like they're allowed to come in.
Right. That is one of the things that we were, again, this was, 20 years ago. And one of the things that, became part of why we were getting frustrated was, when we talk about the unrestricted warfare again, and Josh, we talked about that with Joshua a little bit, but one of the things that we looked at, it's like, boy, we keep saying over and over as official policy that the Chinese are our friends, that they are not adversaries, they are competitors, or whatever you want to use for the term. They do not think of us in the same way, and that became obvious. And the more and more we took a look at it, it's like they're at war with us. Nobody's throwing bullets at each other, but they see us as adversaries. They see us as restrictions to them for their expansion to a pan or a regional superpower. And that's when we talk about the Spratly Islands and we talk about the ability of them to get into the Middle East and Africa. And there's some, you could study, again, this is a whole new area, a different area of study from a strategic standpoint on how they're getting into different areas. When we sold the Panama Canal to, and I can't remember the exact name of the company. It was a Chinese company.
Yeah.
And so which was owned by the Chinese military. I mean, so essentially what we did is we sold Chinese the rights to operate and maintain and control traffic going in and out and through the Panama Canal. And that was going on around the same time. It was a couple of years just prior to us doing the study. And it was just, the more we looked at that in particular as a part of this whole thing to understand the depth and breadth of what we were facing, that's one of the first times that we were really concerned about our own safety, whether we were being watched or followed because of the work that we were doing. But just the overall direction is like, are we really looking at this from a national standpoint or not? And for years and years after that, we've not. It's only been recently that we finally woken up to the fact that we do have competitors, we do have threats, and they're not always going to have swastikas. They're not always going to have a jihadi flag. They're going to take different form. But these, it's still a threat to our livelihood, whether it's a violent threat or not.
One of the reasons why we're able to do as much as we have done is that President Trump, love him or hate him or don't care about him, he said we're going to take it to China on a couple of fronts. And
right,
obviously he's a problem in a lot of ways, but what do we do when the next person comes along, whether it's Joe Biden or the next Republican who comes along? What are we going to do if we don't have the same stance?
Well, I guess one of Trump's challenges is that he came in and upset the boat on a lot of different areas, and this was one of them. In fact, this was the first one, because when he took the escalator down in 2015 and announced his category, a big majority of his first speech was, "We're getting raked over the coals by the Chinese, and we don't care."
Yeah.
His issue now, whether he's got less than a year to do it or whether he's got 4 more years to do it, is he has to have that legacy built into I guess built into the new version of the swamp or the new version of government that says, do we have people that will continue this, or will we have folks that are going to roll over as soon as I'm gone? To say it's like, well, Trump's gone, we don't got to worry about the Chinese anymore. That doesn't work like that.
Yeah. Is there someone on the Republican side of things that you think can handle that job?
I'm gonna stay away from that one.
Okay.
I try to remain as apolitical as possible.
Yeah. That's fine.
There's again, there's folks. There's got to be folks in both parties that have had somewhat of an awakening, or at least an awareness that says, not just because Trump says it doesn't mean, you're going to treat it with skepticism, but hopefully you're seeing the same thing that we were seeing 20 years ago. It's like, you know what, he's onto something. He's absolutely right in terms of this, or in terms of this, or something like that. So this whole COVID thing, to realize that like 90% of our vaccines were made in China, and that's a serious consideration no matter what party you're in. And the decoupling of our supply chain from China is a significant piece. And I know the Chinese they've got to be extremely concerned about that, but that's a big piece of our own national security, is to achieve some independence, or at least diversify it with other countries that are not will not be as adversarial to us on a drop of the hat. And that's why Mexico is happy, Vietnam is happy, Brazil is happy. All these other countries are already signaling, bring your business to us. We'd be happy to work with you.
Yeah.
We can do the same thing. So.
And I think there's enough people that, even if not the majority, there's enough people that are like, I'm not going to buy Chinese crap, and
right.
I'm not going to support them, even if it's saving me money, because it's costing me money. How much
part of it is
cost all of it?
Part of it is it's just like, look, the vulnerabilities is like, why do I gotta wait? I'm a gamer, a board gamer, miniature gamer, video gamer, and I do a lot of Kickstarters for board games that are coming out. Almost all of them have to be made in China. They have to be either printed or assembled or whatever in China, and so there's always that portion of, why am I waiting on this thing to come from a boat when it's a Polish studio that designed the game, to put the game together? You can throw up $200 into a Kickstarter game, or more, just because it's the board gaming renaissance is insane, and but it's like, then all of a sudden it's like, why does everything have to be printed there? Why does it why does the all the files have to be sent? And then you got to wait for it to get shipped out, or whatever. That's turning into a model that's, again, as we start moving at being able to do more low-level production of different things, it's like, why am I relying upon the Chinese and sending this stuff all the way over there? I can get it cheaper and in less time if I just do a limited run here in whichever country I'm working on.
So we're coming up on an hour here. I want to respect your time. What's interesting to you? What do you want to get into? You want to ask me anything?
No, I appreciate you bringing me on. I'm just completely happy. I still got to get you a copy of my book.
I have a copy of your book.
Oh, I got you one.
That's checked off the list, yes. And I've been slowly poking my way through it. Which, by the way, I'll tell everybody, if you're an intelligence person at all, it's worth the money. It's fantastic. I mean, I know a lot about Intel, but just the nuts and bolts of what he puts together, I've learned a lot from it. So, that's a huge compliment, because I know a lot about Intel. So
Right. Well, and one of the reasons why I wrote it is there's, if folks that are interested in intelligence, there's the sources are always geared towards certain directions. So you're going to get, the national books on the national level, like this is the CIA, this is the NSA, that kind of thing, and that's good to know. Then you're going to get books on analysis, like here's how to do, analysis of competing hypotheses. Here's how to do social network analysis, or whatever the technique is. And then you've got another category of this, it's more of I call them the I was there books. This was what I did in Fallujah, or this is what I did in Afghanistan, or whatever. But it's good to read, but it's also just anecdotal. What I was really frustrated with, and this is, again, going through the Army Intel schoolhouse, is getting through the whole school, is like, there was nothing that laid out what I needed to do my job as an intel officer for me, if it was for an infantry battalion and later an armor brigade. There was no nuts and bolts on, what do I need to know about the people? What do I need to know about the tools? What do I need about the data? What do I need to know about processes? And not just analytical processes, but how to not just use these processes. It's more of how do I organize myself to understand what I need, what processes I need to do. And so that's kind of how I ended up writing the book. Was, there were so many different aspects. You don't think that there's a chapter's worth of information just to write about people, but there is. And it's amazing. And you can write in, again, I could have gone further and further and further into more detail on, how do you man a 24-hour shift? How do you break down skill sets according to, your problem areas and things like that. Every time I've gone to a different Intel organization, I've done either consulting work for them or just any kind of training or anything like that, they still get to the point where they're tackling the same problems over and over and over. It's like, what tools do I need for my operation? Well, what's your mission? That kind of thing. So that's one reason why I wrote it. I mean, I know you put the Amazon plug up there. There's if you go directly to the publisher Cognella, it's like 20% off. Amazon is great company. They can get your stuff in 2 days, but you're going to pay a lot more for it. There's other ways of doing it.
Yeah, well, and I get paid too when you buy it through Amazon, but fair enough. Get it through the
What's
publisher.
that? Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, just we got Amazon, headquarters right outside, where I live, out west part of DC.
Yeah.
And folks are all, they're complaining about, well, they're putting up these, these new electrical towers all along the roads because their systems need, more electricity and more power coming to them. And I'm finally just like, you want your shit in 2 days, right?
Yeah, exactly. I want it one
That's
day.
the way it goes. Yeah.
Same
One
day.
day. Exactly. So that's the way
yeah.
it goes. The last thing I just want to do is I want to give a shout out to my brother. He's a uniformed Secret Service member. He's been on the front lines downtown DC for the last couple of nights in a row. He's been working nights for 30 plus years. He was going to retire in January. I'm sorry, at the end of July, but he's now retiring because of the COVID virus at the end of December. He has seen it all, and he's protected presidents from George Bush Sr., 2 popes. He's done 7. This is his 8th presidential campaign. He's done the World Bank riots of 2000, 2001.
Wow.
This riot he's going through right now with his officers is, again, one of the largest he's had, but they've had rocks thrown at him. He's had bottles, he's had fireworks, he's had urine thrown at him, and he still goes in there every night and every day and does what he needs to do. And it's just, he's my middle brother. And it's just like, this is a guy that, by the way, he was a Cub Scout pack leader at the same time while he was doing all this up until last year.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you want to look at law enforcement and complain about, defund the police and all this other stuff, this is the guy that is a part of the thin blue line that is standing between, this kind of violence and a breakdown of our law and order. And so that's, one piece I wanted to bring out, just the amount of respect I have as his little brother. That's, Intel is one thing, but he still takes boots on the ground for these guys to do what they're doing.
Yeah, and I guess since we're talking about that, my buddy, and he's been on the show twice, Jeff Block, is a DC Park Police, and basically, they're the guys that have to go out, and they're getting their asses kicked. They're going to the hospital, they're staying in the hospital, and still have to go out in the next night and man, and as much as it's easy to dismiss what they're doing, it is not easy to do. And Jeff is one of the greatest people. I mean, he is officer friendly. He rides his horse around, he talks to people, and he understands by policing, like by, every second of the day, he's doing something to make the world a safer, better place. And it's not just with the Billy Club. It's mostly with his mouth.
Right. And that's, my brother's he's in the National Law Enforcement Hall of Fame. For being, he's one of the most decorated officers in the uniformed Secret Service. He's got a life-saving award. He saved the life of a woman whose throat had been slit on the streets of DC years ago. He has single-handedly taken on a riot several years ago where he was the only officer on site for several minutes, and he took on several people at once. He's been shot at. He's had a 30-round magazine unloaded into his car by kids doing a gang initiation. Don't know why he's alive, just because his car saved his life. He has seen more action and more combat than most combat veterans have.
Yeah.
And yet he's still going out there. You're getting close to his. I don't want to call it. He's in the Danny Glover stage of his police work.
7 more days.
Where he's got too old for this shit. But but he still goes out there every night and he does that, and that's the most respected piece that you can have out of all this. Is these, I think law enforcement overall is, you're going to have continued concentration on the worst of the worst figures that we've seen in Minneapolis. But at the same time, this is going to bring some highlights. As there's some just fantastic guys out there in law enforcement. They deserve, the nights they're working alone and going into work. It's like, why am I still doing this? Well, it's because folks like you and I care about it, and appreciate all their.
Tragedy is tragedy, but there are 200 million-ish police, patrols a year. 200 million.
Right.
It's remarkable how successful we are at keeping the peace. Can we improve? Of course. But we can't lose sight of that. Yeah, there's some really great people out there. And when your brother is willing to, let's have him on the show. Let's have him talk.
He's not going to talk till he's retired.
Yeah, I understood that. Yeah.
Secret Service doesn't. They got a code of silence. I hear more stories that would burn your ears, but we don't. He doesn't talk about that. Just like former military, you shouldn't be voicing your political opinions while you're active duty or you're retired.
Once he's done and freed up to talk, that'd be a great conversation, because those guys don't get the light shown on them enough. They're just invisible, and that's cool. So, all right, well, listen, I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Let's do another one soon. I'm excited to hear about your new discovery with your latest cold case. And
once we can come forward on that, it's going to be about a month. I'll be able to talk about that. So.
Perfect. All right, stand by. I'm going to sign off. Hold on.
All right, cool.